actress Sharon Tate and 6 others had been slain in one of the century's most infamous crimes. The killers were a group of young, seemingly middle-class flower children, acting on behalf of their spiritual leader, 35-year-old ex-convict Charles Manson. But just who was this powerful guru?
Manson was to have been born as an unwanted, illegitimate child of a young prostitute.
Disowned at birth, pretty much, raised by relatives. He grew up, it's a very tight situation.
It's been claimed that Manson's mother once tried to sell her infant son to a childless waitress in return for a pitcher of beer.
From an early age, he was left to his own devices, got involved in delinquent/criminal activities.
When you grow up on the street, particularly if you're short and slight, like Manson is, you have to be able to learn how to read people very, very quickly and determine who you can get over on and who you can't. And Manson was excellent at that.
From the mid-1940s onwards, a raft of thefts and armed robberies would see the young Manson pass through several institutions where he was said to be sexually brutalized.
What comes through, certainly looking at all the psychiatrist reports and probation reports of Charles Manson, there was heaps of potential there. But something had happened early in life, and this dogged him the whole time. He felt he'd been dealt a bad hand.
By the 1950s, in his rare periods of freedom, Manson expanded his criminal repertoire to include pimping young women from a Hollywood apartment.
The qualities that a pimp has to entrap, intimidate, extort, run the life of their prostitutes, rent them out, sell them, and so forth. Those are qualities that stood Manson well in his future criminal career.
Incarcerated again in 1960 and facing a lengthy sentence, Manson began to study new ways of thinking.
When he was in Terminal Island, there was a Scientologist. Manson picked up on this, and he did 150 hours of auditing, which is the Scientology term for counselling. And Manson started writing songs. What he was doing, which is quite revolutionary for the time, he started imbuing these songs with much of the philosophies that he was picking up from Scientology and also from his observations of human nature. So I think certainly Manson at that point, he's actually left the persona of the petty criminal and he's coming into his own.
There's a time for the
Fellow convict Phil Kaufman would encounter Manson in early 1967.
I was arrested importing, smuggling, if you will. It's a little bit of weed from Mexico. Was convicted in Arizona and sent to Terminal Island, California, where my first day of the yard, I heard this guy playing guitar and singing. He sounded a little like Frankie Lane at the time.
Look at your game, girl. What a man.
I thought the guy was pretty good. The hack, the guard, came up to Charles and said, Manson, you can't play your guitar here. There's a guitar place for playing the guitar. He says, you know, you ain't never going to get out of here, Manson. And Charlie said, out of where, man? And he kept on going playing this guitar.
Hello?
Part of the Manson that the public came to know was a very institutionalized person who was used to being told what to do and felt more comfortable in a confined or isolated place.
When you have an individual like Manson who doesn't fear any type of punishment, really, he's a very dangerous individual.
If someone beats you with a whip and you love the whip, what's he doing? He's making a fool out of himself. It's heaven right here, Jack, right here.
Charles Manson had been imprisoned in 1960. When he was eventually released 7 years later, the world was a very different place.
We had just come out of the 50s, where teenagers were basically kept on a very tight leash, and then all of a sudden this wonderful subculture erupted, and we all became free.
The 32-year-old guitar-playing ex-cop headed to the eye of the storm.
There were thousands of young people all up and down this street, and this was all the psychedelic scene.
Dr. David Smith founded the neighborhood's famous free medical clinic.
1967 was totally crazy. The streets were jammed, people were taking LSD and dancing and music everywhere. You had the diggers giving out free food, and it was just a total insanity, and we were in the middle of it. We did a survey of the thousands of kids that came through our clinic, and 98% of them had used LSD.
Charlie saw a good thing when he realized that somebody ran around and talked. In that day and age, especially up in San Francisco, you could gather a group of followers in no time.
You're taught that you can't. They teach you the word. They give you the word. Take all the words away. And don't think it right and wrong. Think in truth.
Among those to fall under Manson's spell were librarian Mary Bruner, disaffected teenager Lynette Frog, and 19-year-old drifter Susan Atkins.
She had a tough start in life. On top of a broken home, Susan Atkins had to suffer the death of her mother from cancer. And she was, come puberty, pretty wild. So wild that her family couldn't contain her. And like many others, she headed off to San Francisco, where she worked variously as a waitress and as a topless go-go dancer. She came across Manson quite early on in the history of the Manson family, and he was able to assume a fatherly role with her, which is a template for what went on with the other girls.
Also joining the group in 1967 would be 20-year-old Patricia Krenwinkel, later renamed by Charlie as Katie.
She had a troubled childhood as much. She suffered from an overt problem with body hair, which, as anyone knows, has come through the teenage thing that can really screw someone up. And her sister was a heavy drug user. She dominated the family, so Patricia really was a forgotten child.
Patricia Krenwinkel talked about meeting Charlie, and she met him down at the beach, and he took her to an apartment and had her take off all her clothes and look at herself in the full-length mirror and say, "Isn't that the most beautiful thing you've ever seen?"
Pretty, pretty girl. Cease to exist. Just come and say you love me.
And that's it. He got her. She was his after that.
Come on, you can't be.
Like many communal groups of the 60s,
Yeah.
Manson and his girls got an old school bus and began roaming California.
Let's
On
have
his
a look,
release from
guys.
prison, Phil Kaufman joined up with the group in Topanga Canyon.
Never mind.
What age were they?
Just got out of prison.
Oh, it means that's what it's
Oh,
about.
down here.
Yeah, they need him.
They're not forever.
Shush him.
Just the new girls, the new girl would run away. It was good. And the girls would all sit, and play their little instruments and
What are you recording?
not using words.
Oh, just do
That was the hook. You got
Part 1
it.
and 2, yeah.
Phil Kaufman would introduce Manson to a number of music producers, including Doris Day's son, Terry Melcher. Manson hoped to get a major recording contract and introduce his songs to the world.
Remember that a lot of people
3 bottles
this
for
type
free.
of music before. Manson was not that
You're
savvy
right.
to the
Well,
industry,
that's
usually BS at the time. If they said to him, Charlie, it's brilliant. We love it. We'll be in touch. He believed. They meant to.
They may have worn bell-bottom powers and long hair, but they were businessmen, and Charlie and the family were hippies, and they wanted to do hippie music, you know, and it was just total. It was the recording sessions were terrible. But Charlie always kept pursuing a professional recording.
As a child, Manson had been rejected by his mother.
Where's my
Now
socks?
the LA music industry would do the same.
Where did Josh
They
get?
gave
Is that
evidence
not
to
Josh?
me that, you know, there was
Go.
trouble in paradise.
There you go.
Oh, where's my sock?
I just bit my tongue.
Where's my sock, Charlie?
Right in your pocket.
No. I've lost my sock.